The destruction of Ethora Prime was not the end of the war. It was the end of the old order and the beginning of something new. Something that the galaxy had never seen in 12,000 years of recorded history. Within days of the station's destruction, the galactic concord shattered like glass struck by a hammer. The 17 species that had stood together for millennia turned on each other with a fury that had been building beneath the surface for far too long. The Velith Dominion was the first to fall. The evidence that humanity had released spread through their networks like wildfire, revealing centuries of atrocities that their leaders had committed and then buried beneath layers of propaganda and lies. Entire populations rose up against their rulers, demanding justice for crimes that had been hidden from them since before their grandparents were born. The Arkham himself was captured by his own people, dragged from the escape pod that had carried him away from Ethora Prime and put on trial for genocide, corruption, and crimes against sentient beings. His execution was broadcast across the galaxy, watched by billions who had once trembled at the mention of his name. 3 species declared their independence from the Concord within the first month, breaking away from an alliance that no longer existed except in name. 5 more followed within the year, their governments overthrown by citizens who refused to be ruled by those who had participated in the attempted extermination of humanity. The remaining species fell into civil war. Their militaries fractured between those who still believed in the old ways and those who had seen the evidence of what their leaders had done and could no longer stomach being part of such evil. And through it all, humanity watched and waited and prepared when the human fleet finally emerged from the darkness between the stars. It did not come as a conquering armada seeking revenge for the crimes committed against them. It came as something the galaxy had never seen before. It came offering help. The first species to receive aid were the Keth, a race that had been conquered by the Velith 6,000 years ago and forced into servitude ever since. Their homeworld had been stripped of resources, their population used as laborers in mines and factories, their culture suppressed until they barely remembered who they had been before the conquest. Human ships arrived in Keth space carrying medicine, food, construction equipment, and engineers who asked for nothing in return. They helped rebuild hospitals that had been neglected for centuries, repaired infrastructure that had been crumbling since before anyone could remember, and trained Keth doctors and technicians to continue the work after they left. Keth leaders wept when they understood what was happening, unable to comprehend why these humans, who had every reason to hate the galaxy and everyone in it, would choose to help those who had done nothing to stop the purification. "We are not the Council," Rear Admiral Chen Wei explained when he met with the Keth elders. "We do not believe that strength gives us the right to rule over others. We believe that strength gives us the responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves." The Avani were next, a species whose homeworld had been held hostage for 3,000 years by Council weapons platforms that could destroy their cities at the push of a button. Human Marines dismantled those platforms piece by piece, and when the Avani asked what humanity wanted in exchange, the answer was always the same: nothing. But why? The Avani ambassador asked, confusion and suspicion warring in her eyes. "No one does anything for nothing. There must be something you want from us." Chen Wei smiled, the same tired, knowing smile that had become something of a trademark among humanity's leadership. "We want to build something better than what came before," he said. "We want to prove that the galaxy does not have to be ruled by fear and violence. We want our children to grow up in a universe where species help each other instead of conquering each other. That is what we want, and the only way to achieve it is to start being the change we wish to see." Word spread quickly through the shattered remnants of the Concord. Humanity was not seeking revenge, was not building an empire, was not trying to replace the Council with their own tyranny. They were offering alliance to anyone who wanted it. asking only for friendship and cooperation in return within a decade. The human coalition had grown to include 37 species, bound together not by force or fear, but by shared values and mutual respect. They established the Assembly of Free Peoples, a governing body where every species had an equal voice, where decisions were made through debate and consensus rather than dictate and threats. On the 10th anniversary of Judgment Day, Chen Wei stood before the assembled representatives of the coalition and addressed the galaxy. 10 years ago, the Galactic Concord sentenced humanity to extinction, he said, his voice carrying to billions of listeners across hundreds of worlds. They believed that because we were young, because we were new to the stars, because we refused to kneel before their thrones, we were a threat that needed to be eliminated. He paused, looking out at the faces gathered before him, human and alien alike, all watching with the same expression of hope and determination. They thought our silence meant weakness, that our disappearance meant death, that our refusal to fight meant we had nothing worth fighting for. They were wrong about all of it. The crowd stirred, and Chen Wei could feel the energy building in the room. The shared emotion of species who had suffered under the old order and were now part of building something new. Humanity did not survive because we were stronger than the Council. He continued. We survived because we were smarter, because we were patient, because we understood that true strength is not measured in how many worlds you can conquer or how many species you can enslave. He raised his hand, and the screens behind him showed images of human ships working alongside Keth vessels to rebuild a devastated world, of Orvani children learning in schools that human teachers had helped establish, of dozens of species standing together in unity. True strength is measured in how many hands you can lift up, how many wounds you can heal, how many enemies you can turn into friends. The Council ruled through fear for 12,000 years, and in the end, fear was all they had. When the fear faded, their empire crumbled. Chen Wei smiled, and it was no longer the tired smile of a man carrying the weight of his species on his shoulders. It was the smile of a man who could finally see the future he had fought for taking shape. We will not make the same mistake. We will build our coalition on trust and respect and the simple belief that every thinking being deserves to live in freedom and dignity. We will be the light that guides the galaxy out of the darkness of the old ways. He looked directly into the cameras, speaking now to everyone who might be watching, to every species that was still deciding whether to join the coalition or to cling to the remnants of the old order. The Council tried to kill humanity in our cradle, but instead of destroying us, they forced us to grow up faster than we ever expected. They taught us lessons about the galaxy that we will never forget. His voice hardened, carrying the memory of 47 billion people who had fled their homes to survive. We learned that mercy is not weakness, that patience is not cowardice, and that the best revenge against those who try to destroy you is to become everything they feared you might be. He spread his arms wide, encompassing the entire assembly, the entire coalition, the entire galaxy that was watching. We are humanity, and we are not going anywhere. We are here to stay, and we are here to build a future where no species ever has to fear extinction at the hands of those who think strength gives them the right to decide who lives and who dies. The applause that followed shook the walls of the assembly hall and echoed across the stars. A sound of hope and triumph and the beginning of a new era. The Dois Council had wanted to end humanity's story before it truly began. Instead, they had written the first chapter of something far greater than they could have ever imagined, and humanity was just getting started. 5 years had passed at the day the Council had sentenced humanity to death, and in that time, the Galactic Concord had slowly begun to rot from the inside out. The alliance that had held 17 species together for 12,000 years was cracking under the weight of fear and suspicion. The Velith accused the Kareth of harboring human spies, and the Korath responded by withdrawing their ambassador and closing their borders. The Syndicate of Malor discovered that their trade secrets had been leaked to their rivals, and though they could not prove who was responsible, they blamed the Council's intelligence failures. 3 minor species had already declared their intention to leave the Concord, and a dozen more were rumored to be considering the same. The humans had done all of this without firing a single shot, without engaging in a single battle, without revealing themselves even once. They had simply planted seeds of doubt and distrust and allowed those seeds to grow into forests of paranoia that choked the life out of the Council's unity. But the Archon of the Velith refused to accept that his empire was crumbling. He ordered the Festival of Eternal Order to proceed as planned, a celebration that had been held every 100 years since the founding of the Concord. Representatives from all 17 species would gather on Ethora Prime, the Council's capital, to reaffirm their loyalty and witness the power that had kept them united for so long. Ethora Prime was not a natural world, but an artificial construct the size of a small planet, built over the course of millennia to serve as the political and military heart of the Concord. Its defensive systems were the most advanced in the galaxy, capable of repelling any attack and trapping any enemy fleet that dared to approach. The Archon believed that the festival would restore confidence in the Council's leadership, that the sight of 17 species gathered in celebration would remind everyone of the strength they possessed when they stood together. He was wrong. The festival began as planned, with elaborate ceremonies and speeches and displays of military might. The Archon addressed the assembled representatives from his throne at the center of the Great Hall. His words broadcast to every world in the Concord. "We are gathered here to celebrate 12,000 years of peace and prosperity," he declared, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that conveyed confidence and authority. 12,000 years of order maintained through strength and wisdom. The galaxy belongs to those who have earned the right to rule it, and we have proven that right through countless victories over those who would challenge our supremacy. He was about to continue when every screen in the Great Hall flickered and went dark for a moment. There was only silence, and then a new image appeared on every display, on every holographic projector, on every communication device throughout Ethora Prime. Was the face of a human woman, her features composed and calm, her eyes holding a fire that burned with 5 years of patient waiting. Ambassador Vela Aris smiled into the camera, and when she spoke, her voice reached every corner of the station. "Honored members of the Galactic Concord, I bring greetings from humanity." Chaos erupted in the Great Hall as the council members shouted and screamed and demanded to know how this was possible. The Archon roared for his guards to shut down the transmission, but his guards did not respond. They stood frozen in place, their neural implants overridden by signals that had been waiting for this moment for years. 5 years ago, you gathered in your chambers of obsidian and bone and passed judgment on my species, Vela continued, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. You sentenced 47 billion innocent people to death, and you gave us no warning, no chance to defend ourselves, no opportunity to plead for mercy that you had no intention of granting. The screen showed images of the Purification Fleet bombarding empty worlds, of soldiers walking through ghost cities, of admirals and generals staring in confusion at readings that showed no life signs where billions should have been. You assumed that we would stand still and die, Vela said. You assumed that because we were young, because we were new to the stars, because we did not kneel before your thrones. We must be weak and foolish and easy to destroy. She paused, and her smile widened. You were wrong. Alarms began to blare throughout Ethora Prime as the station's defensive systems reported critical failures. Shields that had never been breached suddenly powered down. Weapon platforms went offline. Hyperspace inhibitors activated to trap every ship in the system. For 5 years, We have walked among you, Vela continued. We have served in your militaries, worked in your governments, lived in your cities. We have learned every secret you tried to hide, every weakness you thought was protected, every lie upon which your empires were built. The Archon finally managed to activate his personal communicator, screaming orders to his fleet commanders, but the responses he received filled him with horror. His ships were reporting system failures across the board, their weapons disabled, their engines locked, their crews watching helplessly as human override codes took control of systems that should have been impossible to hack. Your slave species now know the truth about how you conquered them, Vela said. Your enemies now know where your fleets are weakest. Your populations now know how their leaders truly view them. The contempt and hatred that you hide behind your speeches about unity and order on the council floor. The representatives of 17 species turned on each other as ancient grievances that had been suppressed for millennia suddenly burst to the surface. The Korath accused the Veleth of planning to subjugate them. The Syndicate of Melor revealed evidence that the Council had been manipulating their economy for centuries. And 3 species whose homeworlds had been conquered long ago announced that they no longer recognized the Council's authority. You wanted to erase humanity from existence, Vela said. And now her voice carried the weight of billions of voices speaking in unison. Instead, you taught us that the galaxy offers no mercy to the weak. So we became strong, not through conquest, not through destruction, but through patience, through unity, through remembering every name of every human who trusted the stars and was betrayed. The screen showed a countdown. 4 minutes remaining. In approximately 4 minutes, this station's reactor will experience a catastrophic failure, Vela announced. We are not cruel, so your escape pods have been unlocked. Run, if you wish. Flee back to your homeworlds and tell them what happens when you try to murder humanity in its cradle. The Archon stared at the screen, his compound eyes wide with a terror he had never known. His guards still stood frozen. His allies were tearing each other apart. And his empire was collapsing around him. We gave you more warning than you gave us, Vela said. Leaning closer to the camera, consider it professional courtesy. The transmission ended. And for a moment there was silence in the great hall then. The screaming began as 17 species fought to reach the escape pods, trampling each other in their desperation to survive. The Archon was knocked from his throne and carried along by the tide of bodies, his ceremonial armor torn from his body, his authority meaning nothing in the face of pure animal panic. 3 minutes and 47 seconds later, Ethora Prime's reactor core went critical, and the political heart of the Galactic Concord was consumed by fire, but the escape pods had launched successfully, carrying the survivors back to their homeworlds, carrying with them the knowledge that humanity had not died, had not been destroyed, had not been erased from existence. Humanity had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months had passed since the purification. Fleet had bombarded empty worlds and declared victory over an enemy that was nowhere to be found. And in that time, the Council had done everything in their power to convince the galaxy that humanity was truly dead. They held celebrations on 100 worlds, with parades and speeches and monuments erected to commemorate the destruction of the young species that had dared to defy the natural order. The Archon of the Veleth appeared before vast crowds and declared that the threat had been eliminated, that the galaxy was safe once more, that the Council's wisdom and strength had prevailed as it always did. But behind closed doors, in the shadowed chambers where the true business of empire was conducted, fear was spreading like a virus through the ranks of the powerful. It began with small things, incidents that could be dismissed as accidents or coincidences or the work of pirates operating in the outer territories. A Veleth supply convoy vanished in the Cygnus Reach, its 12 ships disappearing without sending a single distress signal. A communications relay station went offline for 3 days before being restored with no explanation for the outage. A senior intelligence officer was found dead in his quarters. His data terminal wiped clean, and no evidence of how the killer had entered or escaped. The council ordered investigations, but the investigators found nothing. Every trail led to dead ends. Every witness remembered nothing useful. Every piece of evidence seemed to dissolve like morning mist under the rising sun. Then, the disappearances began in earnest. 3 monitoring stations in the outer territories went dark on the same night, their crews vanishing without a trace. When repair ships arrived weeks later, they found the stations intact, their systems functioning normally. But their data cores had been surgically removed, and their personnel were simply gone. A Velith admiral, known for his cruelty during the purification, was found wandering the streets of his homeworld in a daze, unable to remember his own name or anything about the past 30 years of his life. Medical scans showed no physical damage, but something had erased his memories as cleanly as wiping a storage drive. Transport carrying political prisoners to a labor colony arrived at its destination with its crew alive and unharmed, but with its cargo holds completely empty. The prisoners, all of them members of species that had been conquered by the council, had vanished during the journey, and none of the crew could explain how rumors began to spread through the lower ranks of the council's military. Whispers that passed from soldier to soldier in the darkness of barracks and the quiet corners of mess halls. They spoke of ghosts who walked through walls, of shadows that watched from every corner, of humans who had not died but had instead become something else entirely. The Archon dismissed these rumors as superstition and cowardice. But even he could not ignore what happened next. He was alone in his private chambers, the most secure location in the entire Velith Dominion, protected by force fields and armed guards and security systems that could detect an intruder from a kilometer away. He was reviewing intelligence reports when he noticed something on his desk that had not been there a moment before. Was a small rectangular piece of paper, the kind that humans used for their primitive card games. On one side was a black symbol that resembled a pointed shovel, and on the other side, written in perfect Velith script, were 5 words that made his ichor freeze in his veins. We remember the silence. The Archon summoned his guards and ordered a complete lockdown of the facility, but they found nothing. The security recordings showed no one entering or leaving the chamber, no disruption to the force fields, no indication that anything unusual had occurred. But the card was real, solid, undeniable proof that someone had reached into the heart of the Velith Dominion and left a message that could not be ignored. The council convened an emergency session, and for the first time in 12,000 years, the elder species argued with each other openly, pointing fingers and assigning blame and demanding to know how humanity had escaped and where they had gone. Some wanted to launch new search expeditions to scour every corner of the galaxy until the humans were found and properly exterminated. Others argued that this was exactly what the humans wanted, that sending fleets into the unknown would only weaken the Council's defenses. Still others suggested that perhaps the time had come to negotiate, to offer the humans peace in exchange for leaving the Concord alone. The Archon silenced them all with a single raised claw. "We do not negotiate with insects," he declared, "and we do not fear ghosts. The humans are playing tricks, trying to make us doubt ourselves, but they cannot hide forever. When we find them, we will finish what we started. And this time, there will be no escape." But even as he spoke those words, even as his mandibles clicked with false confidence, he could see the fear in the eyes of the other council members. They had ruled the galaxy through strength and terror for 12,000 years. And now they were the ones who were afraid, far beyond the light of known stars, in a region of space that appeared on no map and was known to no species except humanity. Rear Admiral Chen Wei stood on the observation deck of the UN's Prometheus, and looked out at the greatest secret in the history of his species. The Exodus fleet stretched before him. 12,000 vessels of every size and shape. From massive colony ships that carried millions of people in cryogenic sleep to nimble scout vessels that could slip through any defense network undetected. This was the sum total of human civilization. 47 billion souls who had left everything they knew behind to survive. They had been building this fleet in secret for 200 years. Ever since the first human diplomats had returned from Council space with reports of what awaited any species that refused to submit. Shadow shipyards hidden in asteroid belts and gas giant atmospheres had constructed vessels that were never registered in any database. Crewed by people whose identities had been erased from every record when Ambassador Horus had confirmed that the Council intended to destroy humanity. The Exodus had begun. In 6 days, using technology and logistics that the Council could not even imagine, humanity had evacuated every world and vanished into the void. Now they waited in the darkness, watching and learning and preparing for the moment when they would return. The psychological operations are proceeding as planned, reported Colonel Sarah Kim, Chen Wei's chief intelligence officer. The Council is frightened, and their alliance is beginning to fracture. Another 6 months of pressure, and they will be at each other's throats. Chen Wei nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the fleet that represented everything his species had fought to preserve. And our infiltrators? In position throughout Council space, Kim replied. We have assets in every major government, every military command, every intelligence agency. When the time comes, we will know their secrets better than they know themselves. Chen Wei allowed himself a small smile, the same tired, knowing smile that Ambassador Horus had worn when she left the Council chamber. Then we continue as planned. He said, let them chase ghosts a while longer. Let them doubt their strength and fear the shadows. When humanity returns to the galaxy, it will not be as refugees begging for mercy. He turned to face his officer, and his eyes held a fire that had been burning for 200 years. It will be as judges. Admiral Corvith of the Velith Dominion stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Judgment, and watched as 900 warships dropped out of hyperspace around the pale blue world that humanity called Earth. This was the moment he had waited for his entire life, the moment that would secure his legacy in the great history of the Concord. He would be remembered as the admiral who wiped humanity from existence, who cleansed the galaxy of a species that had dared to stand tall when they should have crawled on their bellies. Like the insects, they were his mandibles, clicked with anticipation as his tactical officers confirmed that all vessels were in position. 11 species had contributed ships to the purification fleet, eager to prove their loyalty to the Council and to share in the glory of what was about to happen. Begin the bombardment, Corvith commanded, and his voice carried no hesitation, no doubt, no mercy. The fleet opened fire. Plasma storms rained down upon the continents below, turning forests into infernos and lakes into steam. Orbital bombardment platforms unleashed beams of concentrated energy that carved molten scars across mountain ranges and plains. Cities that had stood for thousands of years were vaporized in seconds, their towers and monuments reduced to ash before the inhabitants could even scream. Corvith watched the destruction with satisfaction, imagining the terror that must be spreading through the human population below. They would know now what happened to species that defied the will of the Concord, though that knowledge would do them no good. But as the bombardment continued, something began to bother him. A nagging feeling at the back of his mind that something was not right. Status report, he demanded. Turning to his communications officer, are the humans transmitting? Are they begging for mercy? Are they trying to surrender? The officer's antennae twitched in confusion as he checked his instruments. There are no transmissions, Admiral. No distress signals, no military communications, no civilian broadcasts. The electromagnetic spectrum is completely silent. Corvith's compound eyes narrowed. That was impossible. A species facing extinction should be filling every channel with desperate pleas, with final messages to loved ones with defiant last words. Silence was not normal. What about their defense grid? He asked. Our intelligence indicated they had orbital weapons platforms, ground-based missile systems, fighter squadrons ready to scramble. All defense systems are offline. Admiral, his tactical officer reported. And there was something like fear creeping into his voice. We have detected no resistance of any kind. It is as if they are not even trying to fight back. A chill ran down Corvith's spine, though he would never admit it to his crew. He ordered the bombardment to pause and commanded his sensor officers to conduct a full planetary scan. The results made his ichor run cold. Admiral, the sensor officer said, his voice trembling. The cities are empty. I am detecting no life signs anywhere on the planetary surface. There are structures, vehicles, infrastructure, but no inhabitants. Earth appears to be completely abandoned. That cannot be correct. Corvith snapped, but even as he spoke the words, he knew in his gut that the readings were accurate. Scan again. Expand the search parameters. They must be hiding underground or in shielded bunkers. The second scan produced the same results, as did the third and fourth. Earth was a ghost world, a planet full of empty buildings and silent streets and vehicles parked in neat rows as if their owners had simply vanished into thin air. Corvith ordered ground troops to be deployed. And within hours, reports began flooding back that confirmed his worst fears. The soldiers walked through cities that looked as if their inhabitants had left moments before, with meals still set on tables and lights still glowing in windows and personal belongings scattered as if dropped in haste. But there were no bodies, no bones. No signs of disease or disaster or any other explanation for where 8 billion humans had gone. Panic began to spread through the fleet as similar reports arrived from the other task forces. The colonial world of Proxima Station had been evacuated, its massive orbital habitat spinning empty in the void. New Geneva on Kepler 442b showed no signs of life, its agricultural domes still growing crops that no one would harvest. The Martian arcologies stood hollow, their tunnels and chambers echoing with the footsteps of confused Velis soldiers who found nothing but abandoned equipment and personal effects. 47 billion humans had lived across 200 worlds, and every single one of them had disappeared without leaving a trace. Corvith demanded answers from his intelligence officers, but they had none to give. The Council's surveillance network was the most sophisticated in the galaxy, with spy satellites and infiltration agents and data mining algorithms that tracked every ship and every communication across known space. No one had detected a mass evacuation. No refugee fleets had been spotted fleeing human territory. No exodus had been observed by any of the thousands of sensors that monitored humanity's every move. They knew, Corvith whispered, and the realization hit him like a physical blow. They knew we were coming, and they left before we arrived, but how could they have known? The Council's judgment had been rendered in secret, with no warning given to humanity and no time allowed for them to prepare. Even if a spy had somehow learned of the decision, there had been only 6 days between the judgment and the arrival of the fleet. 6 days was not enough time to evacuate 47 billion people across 200 worlds. It was not enough time to move that many ships without being detected. It was not enough time for anything except panic and chaos and desperate, futile attempts at survival, and yet the humans were gone, vanished like smoke on the wind, leaving behind nothing but empty cities and unanswered questions. Corv sent his report to the Council and waited for instructions. But even as he did so, he could feel something changing in the atmosphere of his ship. His officers whispered to each other when they thought he was not listening. and the soldiers who had walked through the ghost cities returned with haunted looks in their eyes. The Velith had come to commit genocide, to wipe humanity from existence with fire and fury and overwhelming force. Instead, they had found themselves swinging at shadows, conquering worlds that were already empty, declaring victory over an enemy who was simply not there. The council announced that humanity had been destroyed, that the purification had been a complete success. But Corvith knew the truth. They had not destroyed humanity. They had lost them, and somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, 47 billion humans were watching and waiting, and planning their response to the species that had tried to murder them in their sleep. The silence that had greeted the purification fleet was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a predator holding its breath, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Corvith stared out at the empty blue world that had once been humanity's home. And for the first time in his long military career, he felt something he had never experienced before: fear. The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever dared to question their power or their right to decide who lived and who died among the countless worlds they controlled. 17 elder species sat upon the High Council, their thrones carved from obsidian mined from dead worlds, their robes woven from the silk of creatures that had gone extinct long before humanity learned to make fire. These were beings who had watched empires rise and fall, who had crushed rebellions with a wave of their clawed hands, and who looked upon younger species the way a giant might look upon an ant crawling across its boot. Ambassador Vela Aris stood alone in the center of the great chamber, her human form small and fragile against the towering alien figures that surrounded her on all sides. She had served as humanity's voice among the stars for 15 years. And in that time she had learned to read the subtle movements of species that communicated through scent, through color changes in their skin, through vibrations that humans could barely feel today. She read only contempt. The Archon of the Velith Dominion sat at the center of the highest throne, his insectoid body covered in ceremonial armor that gleamed like polished bone. His compound eyes reflected Vela's image 1,000 times, and his mandibles clicked in a pattern that she had come to recognize as amusement, mixed with disgust. "You come before us again, little ambassador," the Archon said, his voice translated through the device embedded behind Vela's ear. "And again, you ask for things that your species has not earned and does not deserve." Vela kept her expression calm, though her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape its cage. She had practiced this moment 1,000 times, had prepared arguments and evidence and appeals to reason, but she knew in her bones that none of it would matter. "Honored Archon," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that coiled in her stomach. "Humanity asks only for what every spacefaring species has been granted throughout the history of the Concord. We ask for trade routes so that our people may prosper, for diplomatic recognition so that our voice may be heard, and for a seat at this great table so that we may contribute to the peace and stability of the Tez galaxy." Laughter rippled through the chamber, a horrible sound made up of clicks and whistles and rumbling growls. The representatives of 17 species found her words amusing, and Vela felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger that she forced herself to hide. The Archon raised one clawed hand, and the laughter stopped immediately. His power over the other species was absolute, and they obeyed him without question or hesitation. "The Council has already deliberated on the matter of humanity," the Archon announced, and something in his tone made Vela's blood run cold. "We have studied your species for the past 200 years, since your first primitive vessels left your home system and stumbled into our territory like lost children wandering into a forest full of predators." Vela wanted to speak, wanted to defend her people, but the words caught in her throat as the Archon continued. "You expand too quickly, seizing worlds without permission and building colonies where you have no right to exist. You ask questions that no young species should ask, poking and prodding at secrets that have been buried for millennia. And worst of all, you refuse to kneel. The Archon leaned forward on his throne, his compound eyes boring into Vela with an intensity that made her want to look away. Every species that has joined the Concord has done so on their knees, accepting their place in the great order of things. The strong rule and the weak serve, and this is how it has been since before your ancestors crawled out of the oceans of your little blue world. We have offered cooperation, Vela said, finding her voice at last. We have offered friendship and alliance and mutual benefit. We do not wish to be your enemies, Archon. We only wish to silence. The word echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap, and Viola fell silent despite herself. The Archon rose from his throne, his full height revealed as he towered over her. Nearly 3 meters of chitin and muscle and ancient hatred. Humanity has been classified as a Class 7 expansionist threat, the Archon declared. And Vela felt the ground shift beneath her feet as the weight of those words crashed down upon her. The Council has rendered its judgment, and that judgment is final. What judgment? Viola asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What are the terms? What must we do to? There are no terms, the Archon said, and his mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. There is no negotiation, no appeal, no mercy. Within 6 standard rotations, the purification fleet will be dispatched to your home system and to every world where your kind has spread its infection. Vela's legs trembled, but she forced herself to remain standing. She would not fall, not here, not in front of these monsters who had just sentenced her entire species to death. You would commit genocide, she said. And her voice was stronger now, harder. You would murder billions of innocent people, children and elders and everyone in between. And you would do it without even giving us a chance to defend ourselves. Defense is irrelevant, the Archon replied, settling back onto his throne with the casual grace of a predator who knows its prey cannot escape. Your fleets are primitive, your weapons are weak, and your people are scattered across worlds that you cannot possibly protect. The purification will be complete within 30 rotations, and humanity will be nothing more than a footnote in the great history of the Concord. Vela was escorted from the chamber by guards, who gripped her arms hard enough to leave bruises. She was not permitted to send any transmission, not allowed to warn Earth or the colonies of what was coming. The Council wanted humanity to die in ignorance, never knowing why the fire fell from the sky. But as her shuttle departed the Council station, as the massive structure shrank to a point of light against the endless darkness of space, Vela allowed herself to smile. It was a thin smile, tired and sad and full of the weight of what was to come. But it was also a smile of grim satisfaction. The Council had taken the bait, had done exactly what humanity's strategists had predicted they would do. She reached up and pressed the hidden implant behind her ear, activating a channel that no Council surveillance system had ever detected. It is done, she said softly, speaking words that would travel across the stars faster than light itself. They have rendered their judgment, and they have given us 6 days. Begin phase exodus immediately, somewhere in the depths of space, far beyond the reach of Council sensors. A response came back through the quantum link. Understood, Ambassador. All assets are in position. We are ready. Vela closed her eyes and let out a long breath. The Council thought they were about to destroy humanity, but they had no idea what they had truly unleashed. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for 200 years, building in secret, planning in shadow, waiting for the day when the Council would finally show its true face. That day had come, and now the real game would begin.